I'm Rebecca Mitchell, 32, and I still can't believe my parents gifted the house I paid off for 7 years to my sister and her husband on their wedding day. The house I invested over $300,000 in. The house they promised would be mine. But that betrayal was just the beginning. When they showed up at my cabin with suitcases, expecting to move in after giving away my home, something inside me finally snapped. Before I tell you how I stood up to my family after years of being their doormat, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if family drama stories are your thing. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. From the time I was 10, I understood my place in our family hierarchy. My sister Stephanie, for years younger, was the baby, the princess, the one who got new clothes while I got hand-me-downs. Our parents, Martha and Robert Mitchell, weren't cruel people. They just had an obvious favorite, and it wasn't me. Rebecca, watch your sister, was my mother's constant refrain. Rebecca, why can't you be more like Stephanie? Was another. While Stephanie took dance lessons and participated in beauty pageants, I worked part-time jobs starting at 16 and saved every penny. Not that I'm bitter about that part. Those early lessons in financial independence served me well. By 25, I had graduated with a finance degree, secured a position as a financial analyst at a respected firm in Boston, and was steadily climbing the corporate ladder. Meanwhile, Stephanie dropped out of college twice, traveled through Europe on our parents' dime, and cycled through a series of retail jobs she quit whenever they became too stressful. I'm not one to brag about success. My colleagues know me as the quiet, reliable team member who brings homemade cookies to meetings but rarely speaks up unless it's about spreadsheets or investment strategies. My personal life was similarly modest. A small apartment, a reliable car, and a savings account that grew steadily with each passing month. When my parents decided to downsize 7 years ago, they mentioned selling their old Victorian home, the one I'd grown up in, with the window seat in the upstairs bedroom where I'd spent countless hours reading and dreaming of a future where I'd be valued. We're asking $320,000, my father told me during Sunday dinner. The real estate market is good right now. Something inside me couldn't bear the thought of strangers living in that house. Despite all the uneven memories, it was still home. So I made them an offer. I'll buy it, I said. I can take over the remaining mortgage payments and renovate it gradually. My parents exchanged looks across the dining table. My mother raised her eyebrows. My father nodded slightly. That's very generous, Rebecca, my mother said finally. Are you sure you can afford it? I showed them my financial plans, the spreadsheets detailing how I would manage the remaining $240,000 mortgage while simultaneously investing in renovations. I estimated an additional $80,000 for updating the kitchen, bathrooms, and addressing the electrical issues my father had complained about for years. Once it's paid off, it'll be mine, correct? I asked, looking from one parent to the other. Of course, my father said, patting my hand. It'll be your house, honey. We'll just transfer the mortgage to your name for now, and once it's paid off, we'll sign over the deed. I trusted them. They were my parents. Why wouldn't I? For 7 years, I poured everything into that house. Monthly mortgage payments of $2,800. Weekends spent painting, refinishing hardwood floors, and learning how to tile a bathroom from YouTube videos. I replaced the ancient furnace, installed new windows throughout, and converted the attic into a home office where I often worked late into the night. During this time, I also purchased a small cabin in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom retreat with a stone fireplace and a porch overlooking a small lake, but it was mine, purchased outright with a bonus from work. It became my sanctuary, the place I escaped to when family obligations became too overwhelming. Stephanie's life, meanwhile, continued on its carefree trajectory until she met Jordan Campbell 3 years ago. Jordan worked in commercial real estate, drove a BMW, and had the kind of confident charm that immediately endeared him to my parents. He called my father sir and complimented my mother's cooking. He brought expensive wines to dinner and talked about investment opportunities. "Isn't Jordan wonderful?" my mother would whisper whenever he left the room. "Such a good provider. Stephanie's finally found someone who can take care of her." I nodded and smiled, ignoring the implication that my own achievements somehow counted less because I hadn't secured a husband in the process. When Jordan proposed to Stephanie after just 8 months of dating, my parents were ecstatic. The wedding planning consumed our family gatherings for the next 2 years, with no expense spared. Through it all, I continued making my mortgage payments, completing renovations, and building my career. The house was nearly mine, and I took pride in what I'd accomplished through sheer determination and hard work. If only I had known what they were planning behind my back. Stephanie's wedding day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect June days that wedding planners dream about. The ceremony was held at St. Michael's Church, followed by a reception at the Lakeview Country Club, all paid for by our parents, naturally, despite my father's recent complaints about pre-retirement financial concerns. As maid of honor, I'd spent the morning helping Stephanie prepare, fixing her veil, bringing her champagne, and assuring her that yes, she was the most beautiful bride ever. I wore the pale blue bridesmaid dress she'd selected, even though the color washed out my complexion, and I smiled in all the photos despite the pins digging into my side from a hasty alteration. The reception venue sparkled with white roses and crystal centerpieces. A string quartet played as 200 guests dined on filet mignon and lobster tail. I sat at the head table beside my sister, watching her and Jordan feed each other cake, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Happiness for her, certainly, but also a quiet longing for someone to look at me the way Jordan looked at her. After dinner came the speeches. My father stood, champagne flute in hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Today is a day I've dreamed about since my little girl was born," he began, smiling at Stephanie. "Seeing her with a man who cherishes her as much as her mother, and I do fills my heart with joy." I sipped my champagne, mentally reviewing the maid of honor speech I would deliver next. But my father wasn't finished. "Jordan, you're the son we never had," he continued. "Your ambition, your values, your devotion to family, these are the qualities that make you the perfect addition to our family." My mother stood now too, reaching for a large envelope that had been hidden beneath the table. A strange hush fell over the room. "Stephanie, Jordan," my father said, his voice ringing with ceremony, "your mother and I wanted to give you something special to start your life together. Something that represents our family's legacy and our hopes for your future." My mother handed the envelope to Jordan, who opened it with a practiced smile. Inside was a stack of papers tied with a white ribbon. I squinted, trying to make out what they were. "The deed to the Mitchell family home," my father announced proudly. "Your childhood home, Stephanie, now yours to fill with children and memories of your own." The room erupted in applause. Somewhere, a photographer's flash went off. Jordan stood, shaking my father's hand vigorously. Stephanie gasped dramatically, her hands flying to her face in apparent surprise. But I knew better. The slight smirk at the corner of her mouth, the way her eyes darted to gauge my reaction, she'd known all along. My childhood home. The house I had been paying the mortgage on for 7 years. The house I had renovated with my own hands. The house that was supposed to be mine once the final payment cleared, which had happened just 3 weeks earlier. The champagne flute in my hand trembled. Blood rushed in my ears, drowning out the congratulatory chatter around me. Jordan was looking directly at me now, a small, triumphant smile playing at his lips. "Isn't this wonderful, Rebecca?" my mother whispered, squeezing my shoulder. "They'll need the space when they start having children." I don't remember exactly what I said. Something appropriate, I'm sure. Something that didn't betray the fact that my entire world had just collapsed. Years of financial sacrifice, of trusting my parents, of believing that hard work would be rewarded, all of it rendered meaningless in a single moment. Somehow, I made it through my maid of honor speech. I raised my glass to the happy couple. I smiled for more photos. And then, when attention had shifted to the first dance, I slipped away, walking calmly through the country club's grand foyer, past the valet stand, to my car in the parking lot. Only there, with the door closed and locked, did I allow myself to break down. Sobs tore through me with such violence that I could barely breathe. I pounded the steering wheel until my palms bruised. And when the storm of emotion finally subsided, I was left with a hollow feeling and one clear thought: I needed to confront my parents. I waited 3 days. 3 days of ignored calls and text messages. 3 days of calling in sick to work and hiding in my apartment. When I finally drove to my parents' condo, I was calm. Too calm, perhaps. "We were getting worried about you," my mother said as she ushered me inside. "You disappeared from the reception so early. Why did you give away my house?" I asked without preamble. My parents exchanged glances, that silent communication that had always excluded me. "It's a family home, Rebecca," my father explained patiently, as if talking to a child. "Stephanie and Jordan will fill it with grandchildren. They'll preserve the Mitchell legacy." "I paid for that house," I said, my voice tight. $320,000. Plus renovations. "And we're very grateful," my mother interjected. "You've been so generous helping with the family property." "Family property. Not my house. Never my house, despite their promises." "You said it would be mine once it was paid off," I insisted. My father sighed heavily. "Rebecca, be reasonable. You're one person. You don't need all that space. Stephanie and Jordan are starting a proper family." There it was. The truth I had always suspected but never wanted to believe. In their eyes, my life as a single, career-focused woman was somehow less valid, less deserving than my sister's traditional path. "I trusted you," I said, standing to leave. "I won't make that mistake again." As I walked out the door, my mother called after me, "You're overreacting. This is what family does. We support each other." But I was done supporting a family that didn't support me in return. I drove straight to my cabin in the mountains and turned off my phone. For the first time in my life, I decided to put myself first. 2 months passed. Summer faded into early autumn, painting the mountains surrounding my cabin in brilliant shades of red and gold. I took a leave of absence from work, using accumulated vacation time to extend my stay at the cabin while I figured out what came next. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, forcing me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it. I hiked during the day, pushing my body until my muscles ached more than my heart. In the evenings, I sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake, a glass of wine in hand and my thoughts gradually settling into a new pattern, one where I prioritized my own well-being over others' expectations. When I finally turned my phone back on, I deleted the dozens of messages from my parents and Stephanie without reading them. I wasn't ready. Instead, I called my boss, arranged a remote work agreement, and settled into a new routine. The cabin's small second bedroom became my office, and the rural internet connection, while not ideal, was sufficient for my needs. I was reviewing quarterly projections one Thursday afternoon when the crunch of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. Peering through the window, I felt my stomach drop. My parents' silver SUV was coming up the driveway, moving slowly, as if its occupants were taking in the surroundings. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but their car had surely parked next to mine by now. So I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the front door just as they were about to knock. "Rebecca." My mother's face lit up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There you are. We've been so worried." "What are you doing here?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "Can't parents visit their daughter?" My father chuckled, as if the last 2 months had never happened. "Nice place you've got here. Bit small, but charming." They pushed past me into the cabin, my mother immediately inspecting the living area while my father headed for the kitchen. That's when I noticed the luggage, 2 large suitcases sitting in the back of their SUV. What's with the suitcases? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Oh, we thought we might stay a few days. Get to know your little retreat here. Without asking me first? Rebecca, don't be difficult, my father said, returning from his kitchen inspection. We're family. We don't need formal invitations. I crossed my arms. What's really going on? My parents exchanged another of their looks before my mother sighed dramatically. Well, if you must know, we've had a slight change in living arrangements. Stephanie and Jordan have decided the house isn't quite what they're looking for. What does that mean? They're selling it, my father said bluntly. Jordan's found them something in Beacon Hill, much more suitable for his position. I stared at them, disbelieving. They're selling the house you just gave them? The house I paid for. Business opportunity, my father mumbled. Market's good right now. And where are you planning to live? I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear them say it. Well, my mother smiled brightly. We thought we'd stay here with you for a while. Just until we figure things out. The condo sale is already in progress. We didn't expect Stephanie and Jordan to move so quickly. The audacity was breathtaking. After giving away the house I had invested 7 years of my life in, they expected to simply move into my cabin? My sanctuary? No, I said quietly. I'm sorry. My mother tilted her head, as if she couldn't possibly have heard correctly. I said no. You can't stay here. My father's face darkened. Now see here, Rebecca. We're not asking for the world. Just a temporary arrangement while we sort things out. Like how the house was supposed to be temporarily in your names until I paid it off? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. That was different, my mother insisted. We had to think about what was best for the family. And that's exactly what I'm doing now, I replied. What's best for me is not having the people who betrayed me living in my home. My father's face reddened. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? The question burst from me, years of suppressed feelings finally finding voice. You favored Stephanie my entire life. You took my money for 7 years, promising me the house, then gave it to her and Jordan without even warning me. And now you show up here, expecting to move in, without even asking if it's okay? We didn't think we needed to ask, my mother exclaimed. We're your parents. That doesn't give you the right to take advantage of me. Not anymore. My father stepped toward me, finger raised as if to scold a child. Now you listen here, young lady. No, you listen, I interrupted, surprising even myself with my firmness. You need to leave. Now. Take your suitcases and go. Where are we supposed to go? My mother's voice quavered, tears forming in her eyes, her standard response when not getting her way. That's not my problem, I said, moving to open the front door. You should have thought about that before giving away the house I paid for. You've changed, my father said accusingly, as if this were the ultimate insult. I nodded. Yes, I have. And it's about time. They argued, pleaded, and attempted to guilt me for another 20 minutes, but I remained firm. Eventually, with much dramatic sighing and pointed comments about ungrateful children, they loaded their suitcases back into the SUV. As I watched them drive away, I felt an unexpected lightness. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my parents and set a boundary. The guilt I'd anticipated was there, yes, but it was overshadowed by something more powerful, self-respect. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars reflect on the lake's surface, and realized I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was reclaiming it. The peace I found after standing my ground was short-lived. Within days, my phone began buzzing constantly with messages from extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, all expressing shock at my cruel treatment of my parents. How could you leave your own mother and father homeless? Texted my Aunt Patricia. After everything they've sacrificed for you, wrote Uncle Dave. It became clear that my parents had wasted no time spinning a narrative that cast them as victims and me as the heartless villain. According to the version circulating through the family grapevine, I had selfishly hoarded my vacation home while my poor, elderly parents, both healthy and in their early 60s, were forced to impose on relatives. What was conspicuously absent from this story was any mention of the house they had promised to me and then given to Stephanie and Jordan. The most vicious attack came from my sister. Her call came at midnight, waking me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. "You selfish, ungrateful bitch," Stephanie spat as soon as I answered. "How dare you turn mom and dad away? They've given you everything." "They gave you my house," I replied, surprisingly calm in the face of her rage. "It was never your house. It was the family home, and they decided it should go to someone who actually values family. I valued family enough to pay for that house for 7 years." "Oh, please," Stephanie scoffed. "Like it was some huge sacrifice for you. We all know you're rolling in money from your fancy job. Some of us have real responsibilities." "Like what, Stephanie? What exactly are your responsibilities?" "I'm starting a family. Jordan and I are trying for a baby, not that you'd understand what that means. You're so focused on your career you'll probably die alone with your spreadsheets." Her words stung, targeting insecurities I'd struggled with for years. But I was done letting Stephanie's barbs pierce my armor. "I wish you luck with your family planning," I said evenly. "But it won't be happening in the house I paid for." "I understand you're selling it." There was a pause before Stephanie responded, her voice suddenly less certain. "The market's really good right now. Jordan says we'd be stupid not to capitalize on it." "Right. Well, enjoy your profits from my investment. Just don't expect me to bail out mom and dad because of your choices." I hung up before she could respond, blocked her number, and took a long, steadying breath. The old Rebecca would have apologized, backed down, found some way to accommodate everyone else's needs while ignoring her own. But not anymore. The next morning brought an email from an unfamiliar address, campbell@campbellrealestate.com. "Jordan." The subject line read simply, "Cabin ownership." With growing disbelief, I read his message suggesting that since I was causing family discord by refusing to help my parents, perhaps I should consider signing over the cabin to them as a gesture of goodwill. He even offered to handle the paperwork free of charge. The audacity was so extreme it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I forwarded the email to my work colleague Amanda Peterson, who happened to be an attorney specializing in property law. We'd become friends over the years, sharing lunch breaks and occasionally meeting for drinks after work. She was one of the few people who knew the full story of my family dynamics. "This guy has some nerve," Amanda replied within minutes. "Don't respond. Let's meet to discuss your options." Over coffee that weekend, Amanda confirmed what I already suspected. I had no legal claim to the house I'd spent years paying for. Since the deed had remained in my parents' names, all my mortgage payments could legally be considered rent. The verbal promise that the house would be mine once paid off wasn't enforceable without documentation. But Amanda added, seeing my crestfallen expression, "We could potentially file a lawsuit for the return of your investment based on unjust enrichment. It would be messy, expensive, and would permanently damage your family relationships." "Those relationships are already damaged," I pointed out. "True. But litigation would make reconciliation virtually impossible." She took a sip of her coffee. "What about the cabin? Is there any possibility they could claim ownership?" "Absolutely not. I bought it outright. My name is on everything." "Good. Then my advice is to secure all your documentation, purchase agreement, title, tax records, everything, and keep it somewhere safe. From what you've told me about Jordan, he seems like the type to look for loopholes." The conversation with Amanda helped clarify my options, but the emotional toll of the situation was beginning to affect other areas of my life. At work, I found myself making careless errors in spreadsheets that would have been unthinkable months earlier. My normally impeccable attention to detail was slipping, and my supervisor had noticed. "Everything okay, Rebecca?" he asked after a particularly disastrous presentation where I'd mixed up key projection figures. "This isn't like you." I considered giving a generic reassurance, but instead found myself sharing a condensed version of my family situation. To my surprise, he was understanding. "Take whatever time you need to sort this out," he said. "Your work has been exemplary for years. We all go through rough patches." His kindness nearly undid me. After so much conflict with my family, this simple act of understanding from someone who wasn't obligated to care about my personal problems felt like finding water in a desert. My friend Megan provided another source of support. Unlike Amanda's pragmatic legal advice, Megan offered emotional validation that I desperately needed. "Your parents are being completely unreasonable," she declared during one of our phone calls. "And your sister and her husband sound like entitled opportunists." "I keep wondering if I'm overreacting," I admitted. "If I should just let it go for the sake of family harmony." "Rebecca," Megan said firmly, "you've been letting things go your entire life. That's why they think they can treat you this way. It's time to stand up for yourself." She was right. Through all the family drama, the accusations, the guilt trips, a new determination was forming within me. I wasn't just defending my cabin anymore. I was defending my right to be treated with respect. As autumn deepened in the mountains, I made a decision. I would fight back, not just by holding my ground, but by demanding what was rightfully mine. With Amanda's help, I began preparing documentation for a potential lawsuit, not with the intention of necessarily filing it, but to have leverage in what I suspected would be a difficult confrontation to come. What I didn't expect was how quickly things would escalate, or that my Aunt Deborah would become an unlikely catalyst for the family showdown that had been brewing for decades. The call from Aunt Deborah came on a Tuesday evening as I was preparing a simple dinner in my cabin kitchen. Unlike my other relatives, Deborah had remained neutral in the family conflict, neither condemning nor supporting me. As my mother's older sister, she had always maintained a certain distance from our family drama, observing but rarely intervening. "Rebecca," she said when I answered, her tone measured and calm, "this situation has gone on long enough. Your parents are staying with your cousin Michael, and frankly, they're driving him crazy. Stephanie and Jordan are proceeding with the house sale. The family is divided. We need to resolve this." "I'm not sure it can be resolved, Aunt Deborah," I replied, stirring pasta sauce that suddenly seemed unappetizing. "Perhaps not to everyone's satisfaction," she conceded, "but at least with clarity. I'm hosting a family dinner this Sunday. Everyone will be there. Your parents, Stephanie and Jordan, Michael and his wife, me and Uncle Paul. We want you to come too." My first instinct was to refuse. The thought of facing everyone at once, of being outnumbered and attacked from all sides, made my stomach clench. "This isn't an ambush," Aunt Deborah continued, seeming to read my thoughts. "I've told everyone that they need to listen as well as speak. You deserve that much." After a long pause, I agreed, not because I expected a resolution, but because I was tired of being the villain in a story being told without my input. The days leading up to Sunday were filled with anxiety. I barely slept. I rehearsed what I would say, then scrapped those words and started over. By the time I pulled into Aunt Deborah's driveway, a stately colonial house in a leafy suburb of Boston, I had settled on a simple approach, the truth, plainly stated, backed by evidence. Amanda had helped me prepare a folder containing mortgage statements, renovation receipts, and photographs documenting 7 years of investments in the house. I also brought recordings, voice memos from various family gatherings where my parents had explicitly stated the house would be mine once paid off. Massachusetts was a one-party consent state for recordings, and while I'd never intended to use these casual conversations as evidence, I was grateful now for my habit of documenting family promises. Aunt Deborah greeted me at the door with a quick hug. "They're all in the living room," she whispered. "Remember, you have as much right to speak as anyone." I nodded, clutching my folder like armor, and followed her through the house. The conversation stopped abruptly when I entered the room. My parents sat together on the sofa, my mother's expression a practiced blend of hurt and disappointment. Stephanie and Jordan occupied the love seat, her hand protectively over her still flat stomach, a gesture I immediately recognized as intended to emphasize her pregnancy. My cousin Michael and his wife Emily had taken the window seat, looking uncomfortable, while Uncle Paul stood by the fireplace, drink in hand. "Rebecca," my mother said, her voice quavering slightly. "We didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly, taking the single armchair that Aunt Deborah indicated. It felt symbolic somehow, sitting alone while everyone else had paired off. Aunt Deborah remained standing, assuming the role of moderator. "We're here to discuss the situation with the family home and Rebecca's cabin. I think it's important that everyone has a chance to speak without interruption." "There's nothing to discuss," Jordan interjected immediately. "Robert and Martha gave us the house as a wedding gift. It's legally ours to sell. End of story. And Rebecca's refusal to help her parents in their time of need is simply shameful," Stephanie added, her free hand moving to clutch Jordan's. I noticed my father's slight wince at the phrase time of need, as if even he recognized the manipulation in Stephanie's words. "Rebecca," and Deborah said calmly, "would you like to share your perspective?" I took a deep breath and opened my folder. For 7 years, I made every mortgage payment on the family house. I invested over $80,000 in renovations. I did this based on my parents' repeated promise that once the mortgage was paid off, the house would be mine. I placed the mortgage statements on the coffee table, followed by renovation receipts and before and after photographs of the kitchen, bathrooms, and other improvements I'd made. I trusted my parents, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I didn't get anything in writing because I believed their word was enough. That was my mistake. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father stared at the documents, his expression unreadable. "The house was always meant to stay in the family," my mother said finally. "We never intended." "Let me play something for you," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. I tapped the screen, and my father's voice filled the room. "Once the mortgage is paid off, we'll transfer the deed to your name, Rebecca. The house will be yours. You've earned it with all the work you've put in." The recording was from Christmas 2 years earlier. My mother's voice followed. "We're so proud of how you've maintained the family home. It gives us peace of mind knowing it'll be in good hands." I played 2 more similar recordings from different occasions, each one documenting clear promises that the house would be mine. The room was silent when I finished, the only sound the ticking of Aunt Deborah's grandfather clock in the corner. "You recorded us?" Stephanie finally sputtered, her face flushed with indignation. "I record many family gatherings," I replied calmly. "For memories. I never expected to need them as evidence." Jordan's expression had changed from smug dismissal to calculation. He was beginning to realize that my documentation might present legal complications for their planned sale. "What exactly do you want, Rebecca?" he asked, his tone suddenly businesslike. "I want what's rightfully mine. The $320,000 I invested in that house, plus the $80,000 in renovations that increased its value." "That's ridiculous," Stephanie exclaimed. "We can't possibly." "The house is listed for $650,000, I cut in. Based on the improvements I made and the current market, you stand to make a significant profit from my investment." My father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, surely we can come to some family arrangement that doesn't involve such specific accounting." "Like the family arrangement where you gave my house to Stephanie and Jordan?" I asked. "Or the one where you expected to move into my cabin without asking?" "We're your parents," my mother insisted, tears forming. "Everything we've done has been for this family." "No," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "Everything you've done has been for Stephanie. I've always been an afterthought, expected to give without receiving, to understand without being understood." The words hung in the air, decades of unspoken truth finally given voice. "I've consulted an attorney," I continued after a moment. "She believes I have grounds for a lawsuit based on unjust enrichment. I would prefer not to take that route, but I will if necessary." Jordan's face hardened. Are you threatening legal action against your own family? I'm requesting fair compensation for my investment. The choice of how to proceed is yours. Stephanie stood abruptly, one hand still on her stomach. This is unbelievable. You would see your own sister? Your niece or nephew's parents? Your pregnancy doesn't entitle you to my money, Stephanie. My cousin Michael, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. She has a point. If Rebecca paid for the house with the understanding it would be hers, that should be honored. Stay out of this, Michael, my father snapped. Why? So you can gang up on Rebecca without opposition. Michael retorted. I've watched this family dynamic my entire life. It's about time someone called it what it is. The room erupted into arguments then. Stephanie crying, Jordan arguing legal semantics, my parents attempting to reassert their authority, and relatives taking sides. Through it all, I remained seated, calm in the eye of the storm I had created. Finally, Aunt Deborah whistled sharply, silencing the room. Enough. This is exactly why we needed this meeting. The situation is clear. Rebecca invested in the house with the expectation of ownership. That expectation was violated. Now, either you work out fair compensation, or she pursues legal options. I stood, gathering my documentation. I'll give you 2 weeks to consider your response. After that, I'll file the lawsuit. I looked at each family member in turn, ending with my parents. I've spent my life trying to earn your approval and equal treatment. I'm done trying. This isn't about money, it's about respect. As I walked toward the door, Stephanie called after me, her voice breaking, You're ruining everything. Just like you always do. I turned back one last time. No, Stephanie. For once, I'm standing up for myself. There's a difference. The drive back to my cabin was long but cathartic. For the first time since the wedding, I felt no uncertainty about my actions. Whatever happened next, I had finally spoken my truth. The 2 weeks following the confrontation at Aunt Deborah's house passed in a strange limbo. I returned to my cabin and immersed myself in work, finding comfort in the predictability of numbers and projections. The mountains were beginning to show the first dusting of snow on their peaks, a reminder that seasons change, and so do people. On the 13th day, just as I was preparing for bed, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jordan's name. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided that avoidance wouldn't solve anything. Hello, Jordan, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Rebecca. His tone was clipped, professional. I've been authorized to discuss a settlement regarding your investment in the property. Authorized. As if he were speaking on behalf of a corporate entity rather than family. In some ways, I supposed he was. I'm listening, I said. We acknowledge that you made significant contributions to the house, he continued. While we maintain that the property was legally gifted to Stephanie and me, we're willing to offer compensation to avoid prolonged family conflict and potential legal complications. Translation: they were worried about my lawsuit affecting their sale. What are you offering? I asked. $250,000. That's more than fair considering the circumstances. It was less than 2/3 of what I'd invested, but it was also more than I'd expected them to offer initially. That's not sufficient, I replied. My total investment was $400,000. I'm willing to accept $320,000, 80%, to resolve this amicably. Jordan sputtered. That's outrageous. The gift tax implications alone. This wasn't a gift, Jordan. It was an investment based on a promise that was broken. I have the documentation to prove it. There was a long pause, followed by the muffled sound of a hand covering the phone and hushed voices in the background. Finally, Jordan returned. We can go to $300,000. That's absolutely our final offer. I considered pushing further but decided that ending this chapter of my life was worth the compromise. I accept, with conditions. I want the money before the house sale closes, and I want a formal acknowledgement from my parents that they promised me ownership of the house. The money can be arranged. The acknowledgement may be more difficult. Then we don't have a deal. Another pause, more muffled consultation. Fine. They'll sign a statement. But this resolves all claims you have against any family member regarding the property. Agreed. Agreed. 2 days later, Amanda reviewed the settlement documents Jordan's attorney had prepared. With her approval, I signed. 1 week after that, $300,000 was deposited into my account, and I received a notarized statement from my parents acknowledging their promise and subsequent decision to redistribute the family asset. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a recognition of the deeper pattern of favoritism that had shaped our family dynamics. But it was an admission of the basic facts, and for now, that was enough. The money brought practical freedom. I paid off the remaining balance on my cabin and invested in expanding it, adding a proper second bedroom and office, upgrading the kitchen, and building a larger deck overlooking the lake. I also set aside a portion for retirement and donated $10,000 to a scholarship fund for young women pursuing finance careers. What the settlement didn't bring was family reconciliation, at least not immediately. My parents continued to make occasional overtures, always couched in language that suggested I was the one who needed to make amends. When you're ready to be part of the family again, my mother would text, or we're willing to forgive and move forward when you are, from my father. I maintained polite but firm boundaries. I sent birthday and Christmas cards. I responded to direct messages with civil brevity. But I no longer twisted myself into knots seeking their approval or accommodating their demands. Surprisingly, it was Stephanie who reached out with something resembling genuine communication 3 months after the settlement. Her text came late one evening. Jordan and I are separating. Can we talk? We met at a neutral cafe halfway between Boston and my cabin. She looked tired, the pregnancy now visibly showing at 5 months. Jordan lost most of our money, she said, after the awkward greetings were exchanged. Bad investments. The house sale barely covered the debts. He's moving to Chicago for a fresh start. She made air quotes around the phrase, her bitterness evident. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. Despite everything, she was still my sister. Are you? She looked at me searchingly. After everything? Your marriage failing doesn't make me happy, Stephanie. Neither does you facing single parenthood. She nodded slowly, stirring her untouched tea. I've been thinking about what you said at Aunt Deborah's. About always being an afterthought in the family. I didn't want to hear it then, but I think I always knew it was true. It was perhaps the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Mom and Dad are staying with me now, she continued. In my apartment. It's challenging. I couldn't help but smile slightly. I imagine it is. They're not bad people, Rebecca. They don't see how they favor me. They never have. I know they're not bad people, I agreed. But that doesn't make their behavior okay. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not solving anything, not fully repairing the damage, but at least acknowledging it existed. It was a start. As winter settled over New England, I found myself gradually building a life that wasn't defined by my family relationships. I joined a local book club. I volunteered at a financial literacy program for high school students. I made friends with neighbors around the lake, including Ryan, a wildlife photographer who lived in a cabin about a mile from mine. Our first date was a hike to a frozen waterfall. Our second was dinner at my newly renovated cabin. By spring, we were spending most weekends together, discovering a connection that felt equal, respectful, and refreshingly drama-free. You seem happier, he observed one evening as we sat on my deck watching the sunset. Than when I first met you, I considered this. I am. Standing up for myself was painful, but necessary. I spent so many years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Ryan nodded, his hand finding mine. Some families don't know how to love without conditions. And some people need to learn that they deserve better, I added. As we sat there watching the light fade over the mountains, I realized that the settlement hadn't just brought me financial compensation, it had given me the freedom to write my own story, one where I was the protagonist, not a supporting character in someone else's narrative. The house my parents had promised and then given away was never really the issue. It was what the house represented, the tangible evidence of a lifetime of unequal treatment, of broken promises, of being valued less. No amount of money could fully heal that wound, but standing up for myself had begun the process. Family, I was learning, didn't have to mean accepting mistreatment. Sometimes, the most loving thing you could do, for yourself and ultimately for them, was to say enough. One year after the confrontation at Aunt Deborah's house, I stood on the expanded deck of my cabin, now more of a proper mountain home than a simple retreat, and marveled at how much had changed. The property had transformed, with the additional bedroom, modernized kitchen, and landscaped path leading down to the lake. But the more significant transformation had happened within me. The financial settlement had provided resources, but the real wealth I'd gained was in self-respect and boundaries. Learning to prioritize my own well-being without guilt had been a journey of small, daily choices, declining invitations that felt obligatory rather than desired, expressing my opinions without automatically deferring to others, recognizing when old patterns of people-pleasing emerged and consciously choosing different responses. With the settlement money, I had not only improved my cabin, but also launched a side business offering financial coaching to women. What began as a small passion project grew steadily as clients referred friends and colleagues. I found deep satisfaction in helping others understand their financial power and make informed decisions about their futures. My relationship with Ryan continued to develop, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. Unlike previous relationships where I'd contorted myself to meet expectations, with Ryan I could simply be myself, sometimes strong, sometimes vulnerable, always authentic. "You've never told me the full story about your family," he said one evening as we prepared dinner together in my kitchen. "I mean, I know the outline, but not the details." I hesitated, then realized there was no reason to protect secrets that weren't mine to keep. So I told him everything, the years of disparity, the broken promises, the confrontation, and the settlement. "That explains a lot about you," he said when I finished. "What do you mean?" "Your independence. Your caution about making plans without everything clearly spelled out. The way you sometimes look surprised when I ask what you want instead of just deciding." His observations were gentle but accurate. The patterns established in my family had influenced my behavior in ways I was still discovering. My relationship with my parents had settled into a new normal, polite, occasional contact with clear boundaries. They never fully acknowledged the years of favoritism, but they respected the limits I established. We would never have the close relationship I'd once craved, but we had found a way to coexist without constant conflict. Stephanie's situation had evolved as well. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Michael, after our cousin who had supported me during the confrontation. Single motherhood was challenging her in ways that nothing in her previously charmed life had prepared her for. To everyone's surprise, including my own, she had begun to develop a resilience I'd never seen in her before. Our relationship remained complicated. The decades of being cast in opposing roles, the responsible one versus the favored one, couldn't be undone overnight. But there were moments of genuine connection, particularly when she sought advice about financial planning for her son's future. "I never really understood what you did before," she admitted during one such conversation. "I thought it was just boring spreadsheet stuff. But this is actually important." Coming from Stephanie, this was significant recognition. Jordan, true to form, had reinvented himself in Chicago, already engaged to a woman from a wealthy family and working for her father's company. He occasionally sent child support payments for his son, but remained largely absent from Stephanie's life, a development that, while painful for her, seemed ultimately beneficial. The house, my house, their house, now someone else's house, had been sold to a young family with 3 children. I drove by it once, 6 months after the settlement, and felt a surprising lack of attachment. The physical structure had never been what mattered, it was what it represented. As I approached the 1-year anniversary of the confrontation, I decided to host a small gathering at my cabin, not a family event, but a celebration with the people who had supported me through the journey. Amanda and her husband, Megan, Ryan, a few colleagues from work, and neighbors from around the lake. To new beginnings, Ryan toasted as we sat around the fire pit on the shore, the spring air carrying just enough chill to make the fire welcome. And to chosen family, I added, looking around at the circle of faces illuminated by the flickering light. Later, as the guests departed and Ryan helped me carry glasses back to the cabin, he paused on the deck. "You know what I admire most about you?" he asked. "My impressive s'more-making skills?" I joked. He smiled but shook his head. "Your resilience. The way you face something painful and let it transform you instead of break you." His words resonated deeply. The betrayal had indeed transformed me, but not into the bitter, isolated person my family might have expected. Instead, I had emerged stronger, clearer about my worth, and more capable of genuine connection. The journey wasn't complete. Healing rarely follows a neat, linear path. There were still days when old doubts crept in, when I questioned whether I had been too harsh, too unforgiving. But those moments grew less frequent as I continued to build a life aligned with my values rather than others' expectations. What I had learned, above all, was that sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and ultimately for others, is to stand firmly in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. That family ties are important, but not at the expense of your self-respect. As Ryan and I stood on the deck overlooking the lake, the future stretching before us like the vast star-filled sky above, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house my parents had promised me was gone, but I had built something more valuable, a life authentically my own. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your generosity? I'd love to hear how you handled it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need encouragement to set their own boundaries. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones that truly set us free. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to write your own, on your terms.